AIDA HAVEL is serving as moderator of this panel. And she is the newest board member of the Outer Banks Lighthouse Society and she married into her husband John's Cape Hatteras Lighthouse obsession. I believe that she also has become enamored with the lighthouse and the history of the island. She and John live in Salvo, where he is writing a book on what AIDA calls the other woman in their marriage. Welcome, AIDA.
Thank you so much, Beth. And I want to welcome everybody to the second part of our program, which is a moderated panel discussion with some of the people who actually moved the lighthouse, the real workers on it. I want to introduce the panelists that we haven't yet heard from, and then we'll start right in with some questions and answers. So the first person right up here is Jerry MATYIKO of Expert House Movers. He and his family are fondly remembered not only as being the most colorful characters on the Move team, but also the most knowledgeable and experienced workers. Although this was not a typical house move, and this was a very heavy house, their know-how and can-do attitudes put many, many concerns to rest. Just to his right is Mike BOOHER from Asheville, the official photographer of the move. You might think that since he was the official photographer, he would be paid, but he was a volunteer on the site every day for months, chronicling and memorializing the move solely because of his dedication to the project. And he did co-author that book, Out of Harm's Way, which somebody has already commended to you, and I would say that is an excellent book if you can find it on eBay or Amazon. Just to his right is Joe Jakobic, the project manager for the entire move of International Chimney Corporation in Buffalo, New York. ICC had moved many large structures, including a lighthouse, before they moved the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. But this was really just a warm-up for the main act for the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. Interviews that Joe did at the time of the move showed that he had a genuine emotional connection with the project and the lighthouse itself, and it remains one of the highlights of his life to this day. There is on your program one additional panelist, Reed Thomas, who could not be here today. He's ill, but he sent an email, and I just want to read a couple of sentences from his email. He's with the State Historic Preservation Office in North Carolina. Here's his quote. Assisting the Outer Banks group for nearly 30 years with stewardship of the Cape Hatteras Light Station, Body Island, Wright Brothers, and many other significant heritage NPS sites is a highlight of my career, and I am certain that many of my colleagues share this thought. It is the people, however, that stand out above all else. I feel so fortunate to be able to work with past and present, a remarkable NPS team whose work and life purpose is also a passion. So let's start with some questions for our panel, I have told them to keep their answers somewhat brief so that we can get in as many questions as possible and possibly take some questions from the audience. And you know our other panelists who have already been introduced. I'd like to start with Bob Woody. Bob, moving the lighthouse was one of a few different options to address the threat it was facing. Do you know what other options were considered to save it, and why were those options not chosen?
I do.
Well, your answer doesn't have to be that short.
There were 10 options that were provided the Park Service to consider by the National Academy of Science study of saving the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. With 1 minute's time, I'm not going to be able to tell you why, but again, that information will be on the internet under National Academy of Sciences moving the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, and they've got each option listed and the reasons for rejection with them. The 10 options were incremental location of the lighthouse intact, a seawall revetment, a rehabilitation, expansion of growing fields with low-grade revetment, beach nourishment, artificial reef, artificial seaweed, no action, rehabilitation of groin field only, offshore breakwater and rehabilitation of groins, and a new lighthouse. Those were the 10 options. Obviously, the relocation option, which I indicated as number 1, was chosen, but the Park Service even massaged that a little bit. What the Academy suggested was incremental moving of about 500 to 600 feet, and then doing that over and over again as the need arose. Park Service went ahead and decided on a 100-year fix and moved it 2,900 feet to its original distance from the shoreline at that time it was built.
Thank you, Bob. I never actually knew that one of the possibilities was building a new lighthouse. You learn something new every day. Joe Jakobic, when the move was in progress, there were many factors that could have compromised the success of the move. What were you personally most concerned about?
I think in the back of my mind, hurricanes was a major deal. And looking at the whole project now in retrospect, Steve Crum, who's out here, did all of the earthwork moving to do the move path. And we asked Steve not to take a dune out because it protected us so well. And he accommodated that. In the last minute, he came out here and prepared that route. He's truly one of the local guys, along with Richie Meekins, who I saw around here today. But you got that kind of talent right here in Buxton. So that's great. That's great.
Next question is for Mike Booher. Mike, the move of the lighthouse is remembered by so many people near and far. As the official photographer of the move, what is one of the most memorable moments you may have witnessed behind the scenes? And I know there's some that you won't talk about, but will you share with us one that you will?
It takes me longer than a minute just to remember, but
Well, you take whatever time you need.
oh, I don't know. I suppose that I should tell a story on Joe here. It was a habit of those of us participating to convert coinage into souvenirs. Thus, Hillman rollers are unsurpassed for rolling quarters into oblongs, and we did some of that. Richie was the expert, but when Travelers Insurance came down, who had a vested interest in all of this going well, Joe got everybody aside the day before, and he said, you know, the insurance people will be here. I don't want to see any of you mashing quarters. I want you, don't go near it. So we didn't. I mean, we listened to Joe. We understood where he's coming from. The people from Travelers show up the next morning. They meet with Joe in the trailer and have a nice chat and all, and they want to walk down to where we're moving the lighthouse. So we start strolling down there, and I've taken some pictures, and I'm walking along behind Joe and one of the executives from Travelers. And the executive reaches over and taps Joe on the shoulder. And he says, Joe, he says, I wonder if I could get some of those mashed quarters for my grandchildren. That was a memorable moment.
The next one is for Jerry MATYIKO of Expert House Movers. The 23 days that it took to move the lighthouse must have felt different each day. There were even 2 days that the lighthouse didn't move at all. What challenges and successes do you personally recall from that 23-day move?
Well, it's always when it first starts, your first push, how's it going to react? And we were up in the air, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet from the timber base to the actual roll beams. And then once we got onto the main beam mat, that was the 70-foot mat of beams that went almost 300 feet, it felt a lot more comfortable. And then the most memorable moment is when the computer went bad and it was showing the lighthouse was leaning out of proportion. And there was some fine old, actually he was a tugboat captain. They always have the same voice. And he says, Jerry, and it's North Carolina twang, says, I think you ought to look at this. And I said, well, I got a little more to push. He said, Jerry, I think you ought to take a look at this. Well, the phone started ringing from Buffalo, from Chicago, because these computers were all connected to a lot of places. And finally, we decided, that's when we hung the plumb bob down, that the lighthouse was upright. And the farthest it was out of level was when the surveyor was telling us, jack it over, jack it over. We kept picking up one side, and then I put a stop to it. And we righted it again and put everything on hold until we got to go ahead.
So man-made solutions are better than computers. Is that the moral
Well,
of
I'm
the
not going to
story?
say that, but you know, things go bad. And you just got to think twice.
That must have been pretty scary.
Well, it got you concerned.
My next question is for Stan Riggs. Dr. Riggs, 20 years later, has the move accomplished what you thought it would? Are you pleased with the result?
The hope was by many of the people, maybe all the people involved, is that it would be the poster child for taking care of our ocean front. And it did do that for the park, and it did it for the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. But in my opinion, it has not had the effect on the state of North Carolina or other states in the country. We're still building bigger and bigger McMansions on the beach. The beaches are changing, and it's going to be, the catastrophic impacts of this is just going up and up. What we did here, what everybody did here, was crucial. And I guess we were a little naive thinking that this would set the stage for the rest of the country. And I don't think we quite made it, but it's a beginning. And education is absolutely crucial. If we don't have an educated public, we're not going to go forward on our. Remember, there's a mole barrier island that has dynamic moves, and it's not static. We could engineer it, but if we engineer it, we do not have a barrier island. And North Carolina has the wildest, biggest, what's left of barrier island systems in the country. This is a long-term resource that we need to learn to live with.
Thank you for that perspective. Danny Couch, many island families grew up with the lighthouse in its original location. Does the current location of the lighthouse feel out of place to community members who knew it in its original location? And I know that's sort of a loaded question.
AIDA, that is a good question. I would say no. I want everyone to understand that the enabling legislation that created the Cape Hatteras National Seashore, that was July 10th, 1953. Now, to be honest, there were a lot of people who carried the sentiment for a long time that the Park Service was the enemy. All right, that was my first experiences as a kid. That segued into a little bit of a softening where they own the land, there ain't nothing you can do about it, so you might as well get on board. All right, now going to the move, when the move was done, and the absolutely good vibes that came out of it. Guys, it's really difficult to fathom how monumental of an achievement that was. Not just from an engineering standpoint, but also with the dynamics of human nature. We're all humans here. But the big symbolic thing for the move now in our relationship, because this is what we have here, you don't have in other places. The Jersey beaches, no. Florida, everybody down there, they're from somewhere else, you know, but for the most part here, you can look in the phone book and about half the people, about 2,000 people can trace, on this island, can trace their ancestry back to 7, 8, 9 generations. But the third wheel here, and hopefully I'll still be around for it, but the third transitional segment is now that the local people, for the most part, I'll give you 85, 90% range on this. See the National Park Service as the saving grace, okay? Otherwise, you've got wings, you've got box stores every quarter mile, you've got the dollar type stores, and you're gonna have Hooters and those type things every quarter of a mile. So thank God for the Park Service, and I think that sentiment is gonna improve going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. My next question is for anybody who wants to answer this. I have heard this question a lot, and I'd like to know, and if they're varying perspectives, that's fine. If the lighthouse had remained in its original location, would it be in jeopardy today? And if so, how and why? Because as you know, the original site is still there. It's not underwater. And so a lot of people have asked, if it had remained in its original location, would it be in jeopardy today? And if so, how and why?
Well, it wouldn't be in jeopardy today, but the problem would be, like a lot of these lighthouses, at this point right now, we wouldn't be able to get in and excavate down to the wooden mat, and you'd be too late to start. Now, the lighthouse would probably still stand for another 15 or 20 years maybe, but you wouldn't be able to move it. It's just like these lookout towers in Lewis, Delaware. They're actually out on the beach, and they've called us about moving those, but they're almost to the point we just can't get to them and move them safely. And it'd be hard to move the lighthouse if something happened. You know, it was the right time to move it.
It sounds like you got it just in time. Does anybody else have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I just, I'll go what Jerry said, but there are also other considerations that made that a just-in-time move. We talked earlier about Steve preserving the last dune along the move path. Now, had that run over, we would have been in jeopardy. We would have to do something different to move the lighthouse. Could have been done, zigzagging it, Jerry, taking it inland and then up, but at more cost and at more risk. So I think it was done just in time.
Can I say, I'll pass the mic down here. Two things come to mind. Number one was the floating pine timber foundation. The guy who was the lead contractor on that back in the day, Dexter Stetson, it was fascinating how they done that, but once, as Jerry and Joe said, once those began to get compromised, we were going to be in big trouble. Secondly, I think the anticipation was based on the United States Lighthouse Service, the Department of Treasury blueprints that were done indicated that the lighthouse was going to be hollow when they got at a certain point. We found out that it wasn't hollow. Probably the thing here was Dexter Stetson did not want to haul all that leftover brick and all that leftover granite. But there was no communication. So we got cutting through the thing expecting to get to a point where it was going to become hollow, and it wasn't. That's a good news, bad news kind of thing, because as Scott was saying, it's a 5,000 ton, not pound, 5,000 ton structure, and that just brings a lot of weight. So once that floating foundation began to get compromised, we are very fortunate. The timing, this is again, just a raging success story, top to bottom.
My next question is for Mike Booher again. Many people have noted the friends that were made by the people working on this special project. To what do you attribute that feeling, that special bond that was created between everybody that worked on this project?
It was a team thing. Everybody had a job to do, and they did it. And I'm going to take this moment to mention the fact that involved in the move of the lighthouse were 365 individuals. Most of them are not here today, but they were just as important as those of us who have shown up. And my intent from the beginning was that in 1869 and 70, when the lighthouse was built, only 4 or 5 people are historically recorded. The brick masons, the stone masons, the blacksmiths. Nobody knows who they were. You know, they may have been island people, they may have been brought from somewhere else, but nobody knows who they were. And it was my intention that moving it was as important as building it, and that should not reoccur. So I made a special effort to record the names.
Thank you. I'm curious, does anybody on the panel think that this lighthouse will ever need to be moved again? Yeah.
I left my card in the time cap.
I think we may have time for just 1 or 2 audience questions. Does anyone have a question for our panel?
I like that question. Won't it need to be moved in 50 years?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's but the basis for that, if you can tell us what the storm patterns are going to be and so forth, if we look at the history and what the science panels, all the North Carolina science panels and all the researchers in the state that have developed sea level curves and storm patterns based on the history, which is our key. The key, we project forward based on what we know about the past. And things here in North Carolina are changing. And if the state of North Carolina threw out the science panel's projections that they requested from 19 members of some of the best scientists in the country to study this here in North Carolina, they said that 1 meter of sea level rise is too scary and it'll destroy our economy. But go back to what Rob Young said. It's a changing system, and we have to be resilient. And moving that lighthouse was a move in resilience. And if the 3.1 or 3 meter rise happens, and there's a plus or minus in there, and it's how fast that happens. But let me remind you that since colonists landed here, sea level has come up at least 2 feet, maybe 3 feet since then. And that's one of the reasons we had to move this lighthouse when we did.
Thank you. I think did you have a question, ma'am? Does anybody have a question? Yes, the guy, right you, and then you.
Just an observation. I remember a day when I wasn't down at the Lighthouse Move very often. But I remember a day where an issue came up, and I don't even remember, I don't think it was major, but Joe got everybody into the trailer. Because there were a lot of contractors, subcontractors, a lot of people working there. Got everybody in the trailer. They talked about it pretty quickly, but definitively, batted some ideas around, decided on something, went back out and did it. And that's symbolic, I guess, of the cooperation and the unity of the team that made it happen. Good job.
Thank you for that observation. Yes, sir?
I didn't start bringing my family here until after you moved the lighthouse. I want to thank you, because that's why we came here, was to see it. My question, I don't know if it's for Mr. Booher or somebody else, my favorite image of the whole thing was the little railroad crossing sign that said Lighthouse on it. Did you take that? Did you invent that?
This is a good opportunity for me to put in a plug for the exhibits that are in the double keepers quarters. After this is over, if you'll go into the double keepers quarters to the room in the back on the right-hand side, there are 5 brand new exhibit cases filled with artifacts of the move, and up on the wall is the original of that sign, and you can see all of the, honey, how many people signed it? 98 signatures of people connected with the move signed it, and it is up there on display now for the first time since the move. So, yes.
A quick question. What do you think is the biggest challenge that you faced throughout the process when you were here? Directed to Mr. Booher.
I'll answer that.
What was the biggest challenge that you faced while you were here?
Oh, I still think the challenge was cutting the foundation out from under it. that always amazed me, the way the guys had to cut it out and the way we had to support it. And the way we had to support it. And then when we got right to the last portion of it, we realized that, okay, our jacks are going to be overloaded because there's going to be a certain amount that's going to overhang. So I actually went to Detroit and got some larger jacks and put under it for supports.
Jerry, how long did it take to cut all of that out?
It's been 20 years, you know. How long, Joe?
About 3 months. 3 months.
Yeah, I think so. And we got behind schedule, and Joe's team had to work day and night for a week or 2 weeks, right? Couple weeks, 24 hours.
Superintendent Halleck?
So my question is, now that this has happened, what would you have done differently with the move?
Oh, what a great question.
The same thing we did after the move, we got better jacks. Actually, we had some problems. We had a lot of safety factors put into this, even though it was floating on oil. We came up for a lot of safety factors. We first started on the theater we moved, and we connected these jacks in cells. And we had 10% of the jacks in this move, a lot of people don't know it, that failed. And we had to replace them as we went. And it was covered in a very safe manner.
I would just say, if I could add something real quick, I would just say the next time you want to move that thing, just put it on a track and let it go round and round. And there'll be a big economic windfall.
That's going to be the Statue of Liberty. We're going to rotate it so New Jersey can see it and New York can see it.
I think I see two people with their hands up, and then we'll probably need to bring it to a close. Linda.
Yeah, wasn't there indeed a storm during the move process that you had to deal with?
Was there a storm during the move process that you had to deal with?
Yeah, the first one was Hurricane Dennis, which was within a few weeks after the move was actually complete. We were in the process of putting a brick foundation infill between the concrete and the underside. And we still had shoring towers reestablished, and we had it partially on brick, and there was a concern, but realistically, there was no effect other than some lost equipment and a pickup truck. But it went in all the windows, yeah. But it came through pretty well.
Yeah, Dennis was the hurricane that wouldn't go away. That's the one that went up and then backtracked. And wasn't on the heels of that, wasn't Hurricane Floyd on the heels of that? Yep. Yeah.
And I think one of the exhibits in the double keeper's quarters is the anemometer, the wind meter that actually blew off during Hurricane Dennis, and somebody retrieved it, and it's in there now, so you can take a look at it. 128 miles an hour it broke at. So, any other questions? Yes, James. Keeper James.
This ceremony has been almost as successful as the move, which took massive planning by many people. Kudos to everyone.
Thank you, thank you. And on that note, I want to be mindful of everyone's time, so I want to very much thank our panelists and turn the program back over to BETT for some final closing remarks and a little bit of music and a note from Dave Halleck, Superintendent Halleck. Thank you very much to the panelists.
Well, one last comment to leave on is that the lighthouse doesn't stand alone. It's part of a bigger system here. And if we want to slow down the processes of change, one of the things we have to do is deal with the engineered shoreline to the north of us, including Highway 12. They've already drilled an alternate road off the island. You have to let that segment of island breathe, and it'll take a lot of pressure off of what happens downstream from that. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Thank you all again for all our speakers and panelists and for AIDA and for putting together all the questions for the panelists. After this is over, you'll have an opportunity to speak one-on-one with all the panelists. And don't forget our other activities such as free lighthouse climbing and the exhibits in the double keeper's quarters and the walk at 2:30 from the site, the old site of the lighthouse to the present site. Also, if you were here during the move and you've got some memories and would like to talk to AIDA for an oral history, please do so. I would like to get Dave Halleck back up for some closing statements.
And I would just really like to thank you all for coming. This has been a fantastic program. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists and all the speakers today. Your stories were touching and insightful, and many of them very funny as well. I want to thank the Park Service staff that helped put this together. Those folks include Jennifer Pierce, Jamie Lanier, Mike Barber, and Scott Babinowicz. I want to thank the Outer Banks Lighthouse Society, Doug Stover, John Havel, Aida Havel, and Judy Moon. And a really special thanks for John. Can I have a round of applause for him, please? This is more than just his hard work. It's also his vision and his enthusiasm that energizes the group and really makes for a successful event. I also want to thank Outer Banks Forever, Jessica Green and her entire Outer Banks Forever Board of Directors. And a couple of things that I'm going to mention. We are really lucky this year. We were able to obtain some funding from the Washington office in the National Park Service to begin something that is important, and it relates directly to this beautiful lighthouse next to us. We received funding to begin a conceptual design and pre-design to completely renovate the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. This process is going to kick off over the next few months. We have some engineers and project managers from the Denver Service Center. They're bringing in some historians and other engineers that will help us develop this conceptual plan. The lighthouse is still beautiful today as you know it. Visitors enjoy it all the time. Over 1 million people or 1.5 million people have climbed it. But it's starting to show its age, whether it's the paint or the mortar, the brickwork, a variety of features that were not restored to the lighthouse once it was moved, including the pediments around the windows. We are beginning a process to plan for a major full-scale renovation of the lighthouse that I think will probably happen in our lifetimes. We are also in the process of trying to obtain competitive funding to have that full restoration done. But the first step is to do the design and get the plans together, and we are on our way towards doing that. So I'm very excited. I also want to invite everybody here and everybody in the community to a special event on July 20th. That's in the evening at Wright Brothers National Memorial. This is another opportunity to celebrate American engineering and ingenuity and achievements. We will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the lunar landing, an incredible American achievement. We'll be doing this at Wright Brothers that evening, rebroadcasting the original landing, and it's a very special event at Wright Brothers because in 1969, we had a viewing party there with hundreds, if not thousands of people watching the lunar landing on TV. So it's our pleasure to bring that to the Outer Banks community here soon, and we hope to see you. Thank you so much for coming today. We hope you enjoy the rest of the day.